Welcome to Chat with the Lawyer. I'm your host, Walla Blagay, and we're honored to have a notable attorney here, Karen Evans from the Cochran law firm. She's one of the partners, and she's going to talk to us about an important issue, medical malpractice. And it's important because you never know when an injury or an accident will happen, and it's good to be informed, and she's going to give us some very insightful information. So Karen, tell us a little more about your practice.
First of all, thank you for having me. And I'm happy to tell you about my practice. My practice is my passion. I started out as a nurse, and nursing is very hard work. When you go to the hospital, I think you fail to appreciate really all that nurses do for you. But it's really hard work, and so I decided to become a lawyer because I wanted to help people, and this was just a different way to help people in a far less stressful job, believe it or not.
Right.
And so what I do is I represent individuals who have been harmed by healthcare providers. And it is, what I tell my clients is that I can't make a guarantee about whether or not you have a case, but what I can do is to help you find answers, help you identify what happened and why it happened. And then we talk about what's the next step. Is litigation the right thing for you to do in this particular instance?
Interesting. So you talk about what's a good case. Now walk us through it. What is a good case? Name some factors that you consider when you and your partners are looking at cases and determining whether to take them or not.
Okay. Well, the way that our firm works, and I think a lot of the quality firms work this way, is that calls are screened because we get multiple calls in the course of a day, and so you can't take every case, and so we try to identify those cases where there's merit and where we can not only get justice for the family, but we can also take steps for safety so that it doesn't happen again to another family. And it's a long, involved process, but if you make the initial, if you make the initial hurdle, which is to get to talk to a lawyer, then what the lawyer will look at are several factors. One, we want to see if we know right away whether or not there's negligence. Some of these cases are more obvious than others, but mostly it's kind of murky to tell whether or not it's a good case right at the beginning. Factors that we're going to consider, first of all, is what are the nature of the injuries that you have sustained. I get a lot of calls from people who are like, I almost died. Well, how are you now is the next
Right,
question,
okay.
because these cases are very difficult. You have to understand the medicine along with the law, and the legal principles that guide medical malpractice cases are very, very complex in all three of the jurisdictions around here. And so we look at one, what happened to you? How are you now? Have you sustained life-altering permanent harm? If you've sustained life-altering permanent harm, then you're likely going to get an opportunity to talk with a lawyer. And at that point, we want to try to figure out what's the strength of your case. Are we able to tell right away that something went wrong? Just because something bad happens to you while you're in a hospital or as a result of the care that your doctor gives you, it doesn't mean you have a lawsuit. Sometimes bad things just happen. But there are other times where your doctor or your health hospital or a nurse has done something to you that's caused the harm. So we're going to look at, one, how obvious is it? If you have had a long history of complicated medical problems, or you've suffered some sort of traumatic injury and then something happens to you that kind of tips the scales and you have a even more severe injury, it's hard to tell at the very beginning. So we have to get your medical records. And once we get your medical records and any radiology studies, x-rays that are necessary, we have to then consult with medical doctors. You cannot bring a medical malpractice case without a medical doctor being involved in it. And so you have to have a medical doctor who will review the records and all the pertinent materials and tell you honestly, is this a case? Has someone done wrong? And then once you identify whether or not someone has done something wrong, you have to go to the next step, and this is the most important step. You have to identify that the thing that was done wrong is the thing that caused you the harm. And sometimes doctors do things that are wrong, but that's not really the cause of your
correlation.
harm.
Okay.
It's not right. It's not the cause of the thing that brought you to the lawyer. And so we have to ferret that out. And then once we see that you have a case, meaning that you've met all the legal elements for a cause of action to be able to file a lawsuit, then we have to talk practicalities. And what I mean by that, we have to make sure that, one, that this is a case that at the end of the day, because there's going to be compensation for you and your family, because that's what a lawsuit is. The only goal of lawsuits are, well, I won't say that. The two goals of lawsuits are, one, to obtain compensation for the family, but also public safety is to make sure that individuals who are careless understand that when you're careless and you cause permanent harm to others, that there are consequences. You're going to have to pay for that. And so that's a role that as a trial lawyer, I take great pride in, because it helps to protect society going forward. But if at the end of the day we look at, after you go through all the burdens of being a plaintiff in a lawsuit, in other words, the person who files the lawsuit, is there going to be adequate compensation, or even any compensation, after all of the necessary expenses attended to that go with a lawsuit are taken care of? And then we make a decision. Does it make financial sense to go forward? Lawsuits, medical malpractice lawsuits, are extraordinarily expensive. If you think about it as a case, I can tell you it probably takes, to get a case from the beginning of the litigation through trial or up to settlement, may cost as much as $100,000 for any one case.
Oh, wow.
So you have to make good decisions about whether or not the case is going to end up in a way that, one, it leads to something for the family, after all the necessary expenses attendant to the lawsuit are taken care of, and what can we do to make sure that this is not going to happen to another family going forward.
Now let's get into, now there is settlement and there is sort of going through the actual court process, right? Now does every plaintiff have to go to court? What are the differences in the cases that you decide to just go ahead and settle, or maybe just go through the whole legal court process?
Well, first of all, the plaintiff, the person bringing the lawsuit, doesn't decide to go forward to settle the case. That's a decision, because it takes two parties. It's the person bringing the lawsuit and the person that's being sued. And the parties, both parties, have to agree that the case is one that can be settled. For the plaintiff, is it the right amount of money and the right other remedies? For example, most plaintiffs that I represent, what we try to do is not only get compensation for the family, and by compensation I mean get money for medical expenses that have already been incurred, but medical expenses that may be incurred in the future. Lost income, the money that you've lost from your job because you have not been able to work, and most often in my cases, the clients are injured so that they cannot even work to pay for the medical care that they're going to need in the future. And then the last category of damages or compensation would be for the loss of just the quality of life. Because you're now in pain, you've lost a limb, you've lost a loved one, you have cancer that is not going to be curable, you have a brain injury. All of those things are costs, and that affect your quality of life. And many people sort of refer to that as pain and suffering, but I like to think about it as loss of quality of life. What can money do to make you whole? Which is the goal of litigation, is to try to make you as you would have been had there not been the carelessness that caused you the harm. And money can do that in some instances, and let me give you an example. I had a client, a young man who suffered an amputation. He was an athlete. I mean, he was a stud athlete.
Wow.
So he was running, he was very athletic, running, jogging, working out, doing all those sorts of things. And he had a scholarship to play college athletics. He was never going to be able to play college athletics again, but as much as possible, we wanted to get him compensation that would allow him to return to the full and vibrant life that he required. So not only did we ask for compensation for the prosthetics, the false legs, we asked for those kind that would allow him to run, like the Blade Runner that we've heard about, the Olympian. You can get prosthetics like that. Other things that people don't think about, when you've lost your legs, think about this at night. When you're at home in bed, and you hear a burglar, you don't have a leg. You can't jump up as quickly as the next person to try to see what's happened. You don't feel as safe. And so we try to do the things that are necessary to give you all of those securities that you would have lost as a result had it not been for the negligence. So you don't think about someone being paralyzed and needing attendant care. You need someone in the house so that if there's a fire and you can't get out because your legs are across the room, or you've done whatever you need to do to prepare your leg for the next day and it's not readily accessible. And sometimes in an emergency, you don't have time to put on your legs. You need someone who can scoop you up and run out of the house. And so you need care at night, attendant care. So what we try to do is to gain compensation that's going to make meaningful changes to this person's life so they can live as full a life as they could have had it not been for the negligence of the professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the hospitals, whatever was done. And so if we can't get that kind of measure of damage, meaning that there's not going to be enough money because of the necessary things that have to be done, then you have to make a decision. Is this a case that really should be pursued? Certainly that's the way that I think about it. I don't ever want to take a case where I, as the lawyer, take home more money than the client who's been injured, because my whole goal is to get compensation for this family. Yes, I have to be compensated too, but that's not in it for me. That's not the end of it. The end of it is that my client is compensated and I've changed their lives. That's what really drives me.
Now let me ask you, this is a sad question because I was a little curious. So do all settlements end in if you lose limbs? You usually get prosthetics. I mean, would they say, oh, you don't need a prosthetic, you can use a wheelchair or something like that? Is it?
Well, I mean, you want to do whatever gives you the mobility that's been taken away from you, the independence that's been taken away from you. So in terms of all cases don't settle, most cases, most medical malpractice cases settle, but many of them don't. Mm-hmm. And so if there is a settlement, and again, a settlement, it has to be money has to be offered by the defendant, and then the injured person has to accept it. And then once you have accepted the monetary amount, there are other things that go along with the settlement. There is going to be a written agreement. There may be a request that in addition to receiving the money, that you agree to keep quiet about your lawsuit. They may want confidentiality, and that's something that every family has to wrestle with. Will you take the money and keep quiet about it? Because sometimes you want to have a public, to know, to understand what has happened so that the public can learn. You want to know who are the doctors that are committing the malpractice, where are these bad things happening at hospitals, and when there's confidentiality in the settlement, it's less likely that the public is going to know, and so it creates a public safety hazard if too many cases are settled in confidence. But that's for each family to decide, because sometimes they won't pay you the money unless you agree to the confidentiality.
Interesting. Well, we're going to have to come back, and this is very interesting, so I know we're all looking to hear more. We'll be right back in a minute.
No, I don't know. I'm scared.
Do you know that you're in my lane? No, not at all. Are you not paying attention? Are you texting? I was just checking in with my mom. I was telling her that I thought we'd be home by 6. It's okay. There's enough time. Just pay attention. I'm not even halfway through my text. There's no way. I'm not even going to look up. My babies are in the car. You have to pay attention. It's just supposed to be a quick text. I'm so sorry.
This is Ban Bossy. Take one.
Pushy.
Stubborn.
Stubborn.
Pushy.
Pushy.
Stubborn.
Stubborn.
Bossy.
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 When I was growing up, I was called bossy.
I think the word bossy is just a squasher.
Being labeled something matters.
By middle school,
Girls are less interested in leadership than boys.
And that's because they worry about being called bossy.
We need to tell them it's okay to be ambitious.
we need to help them lean in.
Words matter.
Let's just ban the word bossy.
And encourage girls to lead.
To be strong and be ambitious.
Listen to your own voice. There are no limits.
Dare to be you.
You can change the world.
Let's ban bossy.
Be brave. Be you.
Ban bossy.
Join us to ban bossy.
I'm not bossy. I'm the boss.
Encourage girls to lead. Take the pledge at bandbossy.com.
Welcome back to Chat with the Lawyer, and I'm your host, Walla Begay, and we're talking with attorney Karen Evans from the Cochran firm about medical malpractice case. Now, she has given us some very enlightening information that we should consider, and now we're going to segue into death cases. Now, if somebody loses a loved one and wants to sue, what is the process?
Well, the process is a little bit different because in a death case, the law only allows a certain type of person to bring a lawsuit. It has to be either someone that's been appointed by the court as your personal representative or your administrator, and then that person brings the lawsuit on behalf of the family members and on behalf of the estate of the lost person.
Okay, now if they want to contact you to have you represent them, can they do that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We will help with that process of getting the right person accepted by the court to bring the lawsuit. And then we would look into the terms of what caused the death. And just like in a regular case, we look at what caused the death as much as we can. Autopsies are very helpful. In fact, for me, absent very extreme circumstances, I generally don't like death cases where there's no autopsy, because then you don't really know what caused the death, and it will allow the hospital, the nurse, the doctor to then argue on a broader basis that no one knows what caused the death because there was no autopsy.
Okay, interesting. Now let's talk about fees and consultation. Now somebody gets in an accident, they want to know, or they go to the hospital, something happens. Do they have to pay for consultation? How does the process go?
Well, I can tell you how it works with me and with our firm. First of all, don't just go to a lawyer because they say a free initial consultation. Most lawyers who do personal injury and medical malpractice litigation, all of us offer free initial consultations. And so that's not a reason to choose a lawyer. That's going to be offered to you pretty much automatically. And the way that we work is that you can call in, we'll take your information down initially, and then that person, whoever answers the phone, will then convey that information to one of the lawyers. And then based on our criteria, we'll either have someone come out to meet with you, or we'll have you come into the office and talk with you about what's happened. And at that first initial consultation, you really don't know enough to know whether or not it's a great case in most instances. You'll look at the damages in the case, the extent of the harm, that will be a factor, but you really need to gather more data before you can tell a person whether or not it's a case or not. And in the wrongful death situation, that's particularly true, because most often people who pass away, there may be competing factors or contributing factors as to what caused that person to pass away.
Interesting. Well, we can also go into another aspect of what if somebody goes out of town or something, or maybe somebody's watching this on YouTube and they see that they've gotten an injury in Minnesota. Can they still contact your firm?
Well, they can. The Cochran firm is a national firm. Myself, I'm barred in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C., but I'm also capable of being affiliated with lawyers outside of those three jurisdictions to represent clients, and I do take such cases. But again, the kinds of cases that I deal with are those that are life-altering, catastrophic injury cases where someone has died, someone has lost a limb, most sad and tragic when there's been an injury or harm to a child or to a baby. Those are the kinds of cases that we deal with in medical malpractice litigation.
Okay, interesting. And also, who pays for the fees of going to court and the whole process that you go through, even you interviewing, using experts in your cases? Who pays for all that?
Sure. The way that works is that in most personal injury litigation, medical malpractice litigation, the attorney will advance the fees, meaning that we pay for them up front, and then if we get a recovery, then you reimburse us for the expenses as well as the attorney fee. But if we don't get a recovery for you, then you don't owe us anything. That's generally how it works. Although, and certainly that's how it works in Maryland, that's how it works in D.C. and Virginia. It's a little bit different in a significant way. But that's generally how it works. The attorney will advance a fee, advance the expenses, although in limited circumstances, and it really will depend on who is the injured person, we may ask the client to pay for getting the medical records or getting like x-rays, and that money does not go to the lawyer, that goes to the hospital because they charge us for getting the records. That would go to the doctor's office because they charge the lawyers for providing copies of your medical records. But that's rare, but that may happen.
Interesting. Well, there's some talk about some of the notable cases that you've worked on. I know there was a recent case of a guy in D.C. that that died in front of a firefight, in front of a group of firefighters. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. You're talking about the death of Medrick Cecil Mills. Mr. Mills was a 77-year-old gentleman. He was working at the time. He worked for D.C. Parks and Recreation, and he and his daughter were out shopping on a Saturday afternoon at a local computer store, and as they exited the store, Mr. Mills collapsed. And his daughter immediately went back inside, had them call for 911. The store owner reported the correct address. There was a fire station directly across the street. I mean, all you had to do was cross the street. There was a fire station directly in there. There were 5 firefighters in the fire station at the time. Several folks who had seen Mr. Mills pass out crossed the street, went to the fire station asking for help. They were told that they had to call 911. No one in the fire station could come out and help them. They hadn't been dispatched to the call, and so they couldn't help. And so those who went over said, well, we have called 911. And as it turns out, 911 had been called by multiple people, but the ambulance was sent to the northwest quadrant of the city instead of northeast quadrant of the city. And then when the operator changed the correct address in the system, the drivers of the ambulance did not look at the change address and continued on to northwest. And then when they were in northwest and reported that they were there and learned that they were in the wrong address at the wrong quadrant of the city, they were then dispatched more than 20, 30 blocks across town to the scene rather than dispatching the ambulance and dispatching the firefighters directly in the fire station across the street. There were 5 firefighters in there, a lieutenant, 3 officers, and a rookie, and they all knew that there was a man down. That's a term of art in firefighter world. That's a term of art. That means a man down. That means someone needs emergency help. And they knew that there was a man down, and not one of them came across the street to help. The lieutenant was in her bunk room, and she was demanding, for whatever reason that's never been clear to us, she was demanding an exact address. The firefighter who was tasked with getting her the exact address went back out, got an address which was not their correct address, but he did not return and give her that information. He went back to the kitchen and then ultimately went out to his car to get his books to study for a promotion exam. The other 2 firefighters did nothing, and the rookie did nothing, and the lieutenant did nothing. And the maximum punishment under the trial board in D.C., which metes out the punishment for firefighters, EMTs, was 60 hours. That's the most that anybody received as punishment, was 60 hours. We think that's not adequate. That is not adequate when you have failed to do that thing which the public entrusts you to do. Come to the aid of someone who you know needs your help. And so we have waited for the process to take its course through the city. And now that the city has failed to act in a way that's meaningful, there's been no discussion about reforms for DC Fire and EMS, because there are legions of stories where people have called for help and either the ambulance has been sent to the wrong address, the wrong care has been given, and people have died as a result, or here where no one has come to his aid. This is not the first time, it's not been the last time that this has happened in the city. And so the Mills family want reform. We have taken the steps to file a lawsuit against the District of Columbia. We've given our notice, and now we are waiting for another set of deadlines to pass, and then we will file our lawsuit against the city. We're claiming that this was a constitutional violation. Under the 14th Amendment, everyone has a right to life. And we believe that the purposeful action of these individuals was deliberately indifferent and cost Mr. Mills his life. And so we're suing them for constitutional violations, for gross negligence in the fact that they had the training and the equipment necessary to prevent Mr. Mills from dying on the streets of D.C. And they failed to act. We think that's gross negligence. So we intend to file those claims against the city, and we hope that the city will not do what they have been doing historically when suit has been filed under similar circumstances, which is to ask that the court dismiss the case and asserting what's a doctrine that's called the public duty doctrine. It sounds like a nice thing, public duty doctrine, but it is not a good thing for individual citizens.
Can you explain the public duty doctrine?
What the public duty doctrine is that it says that the fire and EMS owe a duty to everyone, but not to you individually. So if you call 911 and the fire department doesn't come at all, I mean, they know that you need help and they don't come, they are immune from lawsuit. They can't be sued under this doctrine. And if you call and they make you worse, but you can't prove that, and you make it worse, in the case law, it seems like there's nothing that can be done that makes you worse. You know, they can't give you the wrong medication. That's not considered making you worse under the law. They you know, take you, examine you, and fail to offer some sort of examination that would reveal the problem. That's not considered making you worse. So I don't know what under the law is considered to make you worse, but absent those, so under the public duty doctrine, as an individual, you will not be able to hold these firefighters accountable and responsible for the harm they've caused if the district raises this defense. This public duty doctrine is a complete defense to any kind of lawsuit against fire and EMS if they raise it.
Do they win it?
Yes, they win it. They win these cases, and they argue the public duty doctrine. I think that the basis for the public duty doctrine, let me just say that's because I'm not asking for abolishment of it. I'm just asking that it needs to be balanced. The reason for it is that so that the city, the district isn't hauled into court every minute of the day for everything that may or may not have been done by the city, so that it allows the city to operate efficiently, so government can govern. And I understand that. We get that. We're not asking for the doctrine to be abolished altogether. What we're asking for is that it be restricted. It was never intended to cover cases like this where people completely derelict their duty. These firefighters, EMTs should be held accountable, and we're going to ask that the city hold them accountable.
Well, we're going to have you come back and give us an update on that. Well, why don't you tell our audience, how do they contact you?
Sure. I'm a partner at the Cochran firm, and I do medical malpractice litigation, but our firm does pretty much anything that you might need to have a lawyer for. You can contact us at our phone number, which is 202-682-5800. You can find us on the website. Just put in the Cochran firm. If you want to find the Cochran firm specifically here in D.C., our website is www.cochranfirmdc.com. If you want to find me, just Google my name, Karen Evans.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen. This was lovely. And if you want to know more about our show and more about our videos, you can contact us at chatwiththelawyer@gmail.com or www.wallablegay.com. Thank you for joining us.
I've been in a lot of films your kids could enjoy, like Star Wars, The Incredibles, Turbo, and a really nice family film called African Cats. I've also been in some pretty gory films, like Pulp Fiction, Django Unchained, and Snakes on a Plane. So consult Common Sense Media before letting your kids admire any film that I'm in. Because if they're watching the snake one or the slave one, and not the cat one or the snail one, that could be bad.